Go and try your luck. Test me in again, we let it rain. Please don't start us up. Got that black and white, that yin and yang. Mr. Officer, please don't search us, we don't got a thing. Tell her park it up, then that be poking out them jeans. I've been sparking up, like the fireworks, I keep the flame. Heard you parking up, it's the wrong tree, I got the strings. Yeah, I'm charging up, they can't keep up, got them looking drained. Now they walking up, trying to put the face to the name. Pull up.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of the GOW, the Generation Wrestling Podcast. As always, yours truly, the franchise, and I couldn't do this without my brother, my tag team partner, King Tuco. Bro, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, man, because we got a special guest in the building, man. So go ahead and hit that introduction so we can go ahead and talk to him.
Well, as you said, our guest today, prepare to featurize as he's going to take over the GOW with the Dijak hijack. You might know him as Donovan Dijakovic, Donovan Dijakovic, but if you step out of line, prepare for retribution. Dijak, how you doing, brother?
I'm very good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Doing good.
So before we get on here, man, you know, we talked for a quick second. I know we've been trying to get you on for about the last month or so, and you know, scheduling and holiday season and everything was super busy. So appreciate you for making the time today.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, man. So look, I want to dive right into it. So I saw a video not too long ago. I seen you dunking. So I did some more research and I seen that you played college ball, both basketball and football. Was there ever any thought maybe you had what it take to go pro if this pro wrestling thing didn't work out?
Yeah, not so much in basketball, but in football for sure. So coming out of high school, I wasn't like a ranked recruit or anything, but I was recruited by a number of Division I schools mostly in the New England area, but a handful outside, Syracuse, Boston College. I ended up going to the University of Massachusetts for a year, and they switched me to offensive line, which for them was probably the correct move and probably the position that I would be best at. But it's not really something that I enjoyed and I really wanted to do. So I did it for a year just to see like if I could convince myself that I wanted to. And frankly, that was probably my best shot at playing in the NFL. But in hindsight, not something that I like regret much, because I have friends who played offensive line in the NFL and they didn't do it for very long and it wasn't very fun. So I don't feel like I missed out on much. I ended up making the decision to switch to a smaller school where I could play football and basketball, and I could play the position I wanted to play in football. So I was happy with that decision. I had fun while my sports career lasted throughout college, and then I moved on to what turned out to be pro wrestling pretty quickly right after.
Did you ever have any big fandom into wrestling, or was it kind of just like that? You know, that next thing for you to, you know, say, you know, this looks like something else I can try and really be great at.
Yeah, no, it actually, my fandom was actually based kind of around, it was kind of a bookend to my sports career that we just talked about a little bit. You know, I didn't really, you know, I played sports growing up, but it didn't become like a focal point of my life until probably like sophomore year of high school, I should say. So probably like 2002 or something. So that's really when I kind of started to buckle down and really focus on sports, which is kind of when my pro wrestling fandom ended for a little bit, because I was watching pro wrestling from like 1997, 1998 until 2002 or 3, something like that. You know, and that was kind of the peak of it, and then off and on a little bit before and after that. But then once my sports career wrapped up in 2010, that's when I graduated from college, and I kind of had a bunch more free time because I wasn't practicing sports every Monday night at 8 p.m. So from that point on, that's when I started kind of diving back into pro wrestling again. And you know, for about a year, I just watched and enjoyed it, and then the opportunity to start training kind of presented itself, and that's when I dove headfirst into that.
You talk about taking time off from pro wrestling. The thing is, I think once everybody grows up, right, there's kind of that period where wrestling isn't really cool anymore. But now wrestling's back at it. Why do you think wrestling right now is so white hot? Because you could say since the Attitude Era, this is probably the most popular it's ever been, especially when you look at all the global properties, you know, that these companies are really tapping into right now. What do you think it is about this era right now where people are really starting to latch on to pro wrestling again?
There's a lot of different pieces of the pie. I think accessibility is a big part of it. You know, social media and YouTube started to trend in upward directions. Streaming services, obviously, WWE specifically was way ahead of the curve in terms of streaming services and you know, platforms like that, and they've continued to be, just in terms of hopping on to Peacock and Netflix and all that stuff, and their the TV rights deals that they have too. But ultimately, it's just right now specifically, like past 3 or 4 years, it's
Yeah.
ultimately boiled down to uh, competition. Right? There's multiple ways to consume professional wrestling. You know, when I started in 2012, when I started training in 2012, it was really WWE, and then a pretty decent drop to TNA, and then pretty much nothing else. You know, this was at a point where I was actively looking for content to consume because
Yeah.
I was just starting training as a pro wrestler, so I wanted like as many current matches as I could possibly get. And even like Ring of Honor at that point was extremely hard to find. It was on like HD Net or something, and
Yeah.
I could barely find it.
Right.
Then there was another. I had to really scour my on Comcast to find any pro wrestling content, and
Yeah,
YouTube was a little thin at that point. So
yeah,
yeah, now it's not hard to find, you know, tons of streaming services. You know, you can
Yeah.
find IWTV, uh, tons of stuff on YouTube. MLW streams on YouTube, and then AEW has channels. You know, there's multiple pro wrestling shows on actual cable channels and stuff. So it's just an overload of content. When you have that much competition, you know, obviously the uh, the content itself is going to elevate just based
Yeah.
on the competition. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we are right now, where there's just so many options and so much to consume that everybody's competing with one another, and that drives the business forward, in my opinion.
for someone as yourself who, when like you said, when you kind of started, like you had your, you know, your run in the independence, but then you got signed to WWE,
Yep.
and then for another company like AEW to come around, and then you have TNA kind of reemerging, you have New Japan reemerging, the wrestling industry just today in a whole, just like, what are your thoughts on that? And as far as like you being someone that sees the opportunity that's in front of you.
Yeah, I think it's great. You know, I've been around long enough right now where I've when I turn on any show, whether it's WWE or NXT or TNA, AEW, New Japan, it's gotten to the point where it feels like I'm either friends with or I've wrestled like the majority of people on all of these shows. So it's kind of it's it's very reassuring to me as both uh, a contributor to pro wrestling in the landscape, but also as a fan that it's like, oh, you know, these guys are super talented and they all belong in these different spots, and everybody's doing well and everybody's making money, and it feels like all the hard work that everybody put in, you know, along the way is paying off, and now the product is at such an extreme height, and all across the board, every brand has such, you know, premier talent throughout the card. It's very exciting and very uh, I'm very happy for everyone, both friends, colleagues, and fans alike. You know, it feels like everybody's getting the best of the landscape, and that's a very exciting thing to see and to experience.
Speaking of, you know, you talk about the indies, you talk about the pros. As somebody that's wrestled, you know, on the lowest of the low and the highest of the high as far as mainstream and notoriety and things like that, can
Mhm.
you describe for us mere regular folk here who think we know wrestling, the difference between structuring a wrestling match, let's say on the indies, and then actually having a match structure for TV, and just the intricacies and details that maybe we don't realize as fans of the product that could really make or break how we view a wrestler?
Yeah, Well, it's for starters, it's not as clear cut as you would think that it might be in terms of the differences between one platform and another. The reality of the situation is it's all case by case,
Mhm.
and it's all it's very you want to it's situational in that you want to wrestle for your audience, and your
Yeah.
audience is not always the people in the crowd, right? That's a common misconception, certainly amongst fans, is they think that everything that's being done in the ring is for them,
Right.
for the people who are sitting there in the seats, and that it's being structured as such. Sometimes that's the case, probably more often than not that's the case, but sometimes, especially when it's television specifically, there's a lot more that goes into structure and design, and what's the business, and whose business is it, and what am I trying to make the booker happy? Am I trying to make the writer happy? Are we trying to get over a story that's going to pay off later? Because then, sometimes getting the reaction from the live crowd goes out the window, because that's not the business
Yeah.
of what's happening. That's not who I'm wrestling for in that moment. Um, so yeah, again, it's extremely situational. A lot of the time, if you get longer time on television, then you have more leeway to kind of work toward the crowd. If I'm working toward the crowd, then I'm taking into account how much that crowd is familiar with me, how much they're familiar with the other person, where our geographic location is, what country we're in, what state we're in, different stuff like that. Have I wrestled there a bunch? There's all sorts of factors, and you don't really sit down and go through the list of them, but it's more of just like a general feel, like I'm familiar with this place. I kind of know the lay of the land. Here's my gut instinct, and then you start to build off of that. And obviously it's a collaborative effort with the other wrestler and the producer, if you have a producer, and things like that. So there's just it's way too complicated to break down in like a 30-second sound bite. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the general
Right.
idea, that you want to for sure wrestle for your audience, and you need to spend a good amount of time figuring out who your audience is and why, and then you start to kind of build from there.
I want to bring it back to you, man. I want to hear, who are some of the people that, for you, that when you started to get into this business and you knew, okay, this is what I want to do, and I need to learn the tricks of the trade. I need to know what it is, the ins and outs. Like you say, all those things, those integral things that you need to know. Who were some of the people that were instrumental to you and that upbringing for you?
Yeah. So first and foremost were all the guys I was surrounded with on the New England independent scene. Yeah, I started training at the New England Pro Wrestling Academy in 2012. My head trainer was a guy by the name of Brian Fury. And then some of my supplemental trainers were Todd Hansen, who's Ivar of the Viking Raiders. I still talk to him every single day. Really good friend of mine. Tommaso Ciampa helped a lot. Guys like Matt Taven were around a lot. So these were a lot of the guys that I was, focusing on and taking from and absorbing from. But there's also the watching people aspect. People I didn't know at the time. In the years since, I've met a lot of these people and had the opportunity to wrestle a lot of them and learn from them and get feedback from them. But at first, I was watching any guy who was roughly my size or bigger,
Mhm.
that could move very well, was someone that I was watching a lot of. Like Randy Orton comes to mind, JBL comes to mind, Undertaker, Kane, anyone who was like a big guy who could move
Right.
really well, Mike Awesome. These were the guys that I was really sinking my teeth into in terms of, how do they structure things? How do they sell things? How do they move? Brock Lesnar is another guy that I was watching a ton of. Just anybody who was a good sized athlete that moves very well and sells very well and tells a good story in the ring was someone that I would gravitate towards in terms of who I was learning from and what type of content I was consuming and that I gravitated towards.
I could see that because remembering your matches that you had with Keith Lee and just seeing the way you guys were able to work well with each other. Two big guys who weren't afraid to not only just hit each other, but guys weren't afraid to go to the top rope. And I've always been a fan of big guys, Vader, Hugh Morris, Bam Bam Bigelow, guys who don't mind going to the top rope and jumping off. And I've always liked that about you, is that you're not just somebody that's just on the ground and just basic. You're agile. You could do pretty much almost everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I prided myself on that for a very long time. There was all the guys that I mentioned were very athletic for their size, but they also came up in the business at a time where bits and pieces of that were almost discouraged to a point. It was like save everything. And I was told that quite often too. And I do to a certain degree, but I was always pushing myself in terms of what I could do and how it would look visually. And there was a point, it was actually pretty funny. There was a point when I was in Ring of Honor in 2015 or 16, where I would look around and I'd kind of count throughout the locker room and the roster. And there was a point where I was probably in the top 3 or 4 high flyers in the entire company, just in terms because nobody was doing it. It was like Matt Sydal and the Young Bucks, and then me, just because there was no one else. ACH to a certain degree, but there just wasn't much else in terms of guys who were doing stuff off the top right. And I was doing all sorts of stuff at that point. But back when I was younger, I could springboard tornillo to the outside, and I was doing front flips all over. I was just doing a ton, just because I was trying to stand out as much as I could. And whether that's a pro or a con, you can kind of argue. At that point, there was lots of big guys who were, wrestling like big guys. So I wanted to be a big guy who was more athletic than a lot of the smaller guys. That's kind of what I was hanging my hat on. As I kind of progressed throughout my career, I'm getting older. I still do a lot of high flying stuff, but I try to tone it down a little bit and keep it to 1 or 2 things a match rather than busting out everything every single time.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when you listen to a lot of the older wrestlers, they often talk about the old school mentality versus the new school mentality. You say big guys back in the day, they can do some of the high flying stuff, but they were more, you're supposed to be the intimidating brute, the monster, the ground and pound type of guy. And then, like you said, occasionally Taker, he'd do what's that, the old school, he'd do a dive over the top rope, but it wouldn't happen often. So how do you, especially if you're a heel or a baby face, how do you okay, I'm this 6 foot whatever big guy, I can do these moves, but how do you keep the integrity of the character, and how do you balance that between let's do it for a pop because I know it'll get a reaction, or let's not do it because it's really not needed? How do you balance that out?
It's very situational. A lot of people, I hear that. It's funny that you mentioned the old school versus new school mentality. And I bring this up a lot in a lot of the seminars that I do and a lot of the training that I do. I'm actually a trainer at the New England Pro Wrestling Academy, which I was talking about earlier. And because everything that I teach and talk about and train is all based in a lot of fundamentals and sort of that quote unquote old school mentality. The part of it that I never adhered to, and the part of it that I never accepted, was that it had to be one or the other, right? Which is what, even the way you phrased it, you said old school versus new school. I don't feel like it has to be that. I feel like there's room for both, right? And that's the part of it that I never quite understood, was that, you either have to do like this less is more sort of thing, or you need to be this spot guy who's doing all sorts of flips and dives and stuff. I feel like you can do both. I feel like you can work a grounded story, have intent facials, do size differentials, have great psychology, and do cool moves, and do cool flips, and do interesting stuff when the time calls for it, right? I'm not doing flips and doing things just for the sake of getting a pop. I like to build the things and have proper psychology and make it make sense. But the reality of the situation is, people think that of me. Like, I see this a lot. I saw it today. I saw someone say something to the effect of, I would have been better off if I stayed grounded, if I played to my size more. I think people have this misconception of me that I'm always flying all over the place and I'm always doing these sort of high flying moves because they don't consume me fully as a professional wrestler. They don't watch all of my matches like I do. They see a GIF, and the reality of the GIF is that you're always going to get the biggest move of the match. You're always going to get the most spectacular thing, and then all they see of me is these GIFs, and they go, "Oh, he's just jumping all over the place. He's flying. He's doing these crazy moves. He's doing these crazy no sells." The reality is that I'm not doing it that often. That's one takeover match, and it's the end of a takeover match, that had a lot of groundwork and storytelling and psychology and things like that. So the reality of the situation is that I wrestled as T-Bar for 2 years. I didn't do one dive. I didn't do one flip. I didn't do one thing, because my whole point of that was I'm a heel who's going to get heat and I'm going to stay grounded. I gained like 30 pounds. I wanted to be a completely different presentation. And a lot of that was wrestling toward my audience. And my audience at that point was Vince McMahon. So I was trying to change my style to adhere to my audience. And the reality of that is that nobody cared. Nobody was like talking about me or talking about my great matches or doing this or doing that because it didn't exist. So when people say, "Oh, he would have been better off being grounded and doing this and doing that," probably not, because ultimately it comes down to the taste of the booker and whoever's pushing you or not pushing you or whatever. And I was just trying to fit into that mold of the person who was in charge of my career at that point, because that became my audience. And the reality of that situation is that no one was hearing about it and hearing about these matches because the cool moves and the high flying spots and stuff weren't happening. So, and this, I could talk about this all day, right? Because this is the premise of promos and Twitter stuff and everything about pro wrestling is if you're not polarizing, then you just don't exist. Nobody's hearing about you. Nobody's talking about you unless you're getting pushed, right? So the fact of the matter is that for people who aren't getting these pushes and aren't in the main event title scenes and stuff, people see those people who are having success and go, "Oh, well, they're not doing X, Y, and Z. They're getting over because of this and they're getting over because of that." The reality is the guys who aren't in those scenes and aren't polarizing and stuff, you're just not thinking about them and not talking about them. So it's like out of sight, out of mind, and that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing to be forgotten in the pro wrestling industry. So right. So I've already rambled about this too much.
Oh no, you're good.
No, and it's important things because it's the things that sometimes I think people that overlook. You mentioned the retribution, and I don't want to just ask you about retribution because I'm gonna try to break this down simple. You went through what you did with retribution and its ups and downs. You got an opportunity to go back to NXT, and your second run, kind of like that Terminator kind of Dijak that you were. It was cool because you were smash mouth, you were serious, you were no jokes, no punches pulled, and your match with Wesley where you dislocated your finger. Bravo. Sorry you dislocated your finger, but great match. But to have to go through that, to go through trying to repackage yourself and to represent yourself the way you were, and then to you have these matches, and then it gets back to that, like you say, that trying to impress that one person. What as somebody who had to go through all of that, what is something you could say to the next person that can help them through some of those issues? And just I know I've kind of bunched that all together, but just kind of sum up how you can kind of get through some of those issues and maybe some ways that helped you. Because I remember you wanted to talk to Vince. I remember one interview you had, you said you wanted to talk to him, but he told you that it was unprofessional by the way that you came to him. And I just wanted to, I'm like, man, how can you be unprofessional about wanting to talk to somebody about you and what you think about you? How does one get through that? How does one, be able to handle those type of situations and not put themselves in a bad way, if possible?
It's all situational. I did what I did and reacted the way that I reacted and approached different situations. And specifically in my time in WWE, and quite frankly, before my time in WWE and after as well, just all throughout my pro wrestling career, you're always faced with lots of decisions that you need to make, and there's no correct way to approach them. There's no right or wrong way to approach them. It's all just kind of guessing and feeling how you feel in the moment and saying, this is what I feel like I need to do right now. You know, a lot of those meetings, like going to Vince, came from a place of I don't know if desperation is the right word,
Right.
but it came from a place of like, I have to try something or I'm going to regret it, right?
Right.
Because I would see, you know, when you, especially when you're in WWE, you see a lot of people just like falling off, right? You know, there's the rounds of releases where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I go 10 of my friends, and
Yep.
you look at them and you go, what did they do wrong? Like, what did they not ask enough questions? Did they not push for themselves? Did they not lobby for themselves? So, like, you know, 2 or 3 months would go by and I'm quote unquote called up to Raw and nothing's happened. It's like, I don't want to just be the person who just vanishes one day. And so I'm like, all right, I'll go talk to him. And then I hear that some people have a good rapport, you know, being more friendly and being more casual, and then it turns out that he wanted me to be more serious and in a suit or something. So it's just guesswork, right? I can't go back and say, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. Ultimately, all of these people are just human beings who get out of bed, have a bad day, see someone's face, don't like their face. You know, my advice to myself that I have to constantly remind myself about, and my advice to anyone else who ever finds themselves in my situation, would be just control what you can control. That's it. Just control what you can control, right? If you do what you think is best for you, that's the best you can do. Don't second guess. Don't hope. Don't worry about things that are out of your control. Just control what you can control. That's it. And if something goes wrong, still, you can't go back and fix it. You can't go back and change it. Just control what you can control. And that's been a big part of my time throughout WWE. That's been a huge part of my time post WWE, right?
Yeah.
All these thoughts about what should I have done? What did I do wrong? Who did I piss off? Why did they get pissed off? Like what thing did I do? Who did I look at wrong? You know what? And ultimately, all of that doesn't accomplish anything. The only thing that accomplishes anything is worrying about me and what I can do now and how it moves me forward throughout my career and my business and my family and all of those things, because that's ultimately my focus. And do I always adhere to that? No. It's very easy to let the thoughts creep in, but you have to constantly remind yourself to control what you can control. That's the best advice I can give anyone in pro wrestling, and quite frankly, anybody in life as well. Anyone across the board. It's the best advice, period, for anyone.
Appreciate that, man.
So you said this several times, and I took note of it. You said you did what you thought whoever was in charge wanted you to be or wanted you to do. Has there been a time where somebody gave you an idea and it went completely against everything you knew was right for you, but you said, you know what, fuck it, this is what they want, this is what I'm gonna do? How do you balance doing what the boss says do and still trying to stay true to yourself, to your gimmick, or to to your vision of you, without being quote unquote hard to work with, or stirring the pot, if you will?
It's a balancing act. It's just so much a balancing act. I'm glad you asked that question, because it's the thought that traversed my mind all throughout my tenure in WWE. It really is, because the reality of the situation is you can parade the independence flag around and say, like, I'm going to stay true to myself. I'm not going to do any. I watched so many people, quote unquote, stay true to themselves and like refuse what was being done or what was being given to them, and they were gone so fast, right? They were just they were gone. And these are people who struggle for work now and vanished, But the reality of the situation is that it's all dependent situationally. Because I watched some people do that and have huge success. I watched CM Punk never listened to any. I shouldn't say never listen to anybody, but he's a guy who's marched to the beat of his own
He's a
drum,
rebel.
his own decisions. He says what he wants when he wants for a very long time and had a huge level of success for that.
Yeah.
That's one example of someone it worked for. There's another example of someone who did the exact same thing and it was a catastrophic failure. It's all situational. Then there's people who I watched, they followed every order, they did everything the boss wanted, they were perfect, right on time, first person, last person to leave. Just couldn't possibly have been a more model employee, and they got let go just the same as anybody else. We don't need you anymore. You're not.
Yeah.
But then I also watch people who did that and did have success. Oh, they have a job for life. They'll do whatever the boss says. It's all situational, and it ultimately just becomes a guess of like, what do you think is going to work for you in this situation? I'll tell you this much: it always helps if whoever's in charge points at you and says you're the guy, because then no matter what decision you make, it's probably the right decision. It's just gonna work one way or the other. I've watched that happen a number of times where someone is just chosen for whatever reason, whether they got a great look or they got a great promo or what. Someone just likes their face and says that's going to be my guy, right? And then no matter what decision you make, that ends up being the right decision because they're just going to doubling down on you. And but that's part of the business. These people are bookers and they need to make decisions to generate revenue just like anybody else. So at some point you need to say like that's who we're going all in on, and it's not a bad decision or a wrong decision. It's just kind of the luck of the draw sometimes. That's part of it.
I know we got to get ready to let you go and get out of here, but I wanted to get with you about now that you're from WWE, you're with MLW, you've been on your own for the past about 5 or 6 months now. Just what has Donovan Dijak been doing that to put himself back out there as that guy?
Everything I'm doing right now is about rebranding myself moving forward, right? Because I have a character that I love that's based on me, that's based on my reality, my past, but it's also got a ton of sort of cinematic comic book sort of lore to it. It's a character that has depth in terms of a profession and things like that. So it has a lot of if integratability is a word, I don't know if it is, but it sounds like a cool word. You can
roll with it.
You can put it in a lot of different situations, which I love. It's interesting. It has depth. But it also gives me the freedom to be myself and make my own choices and make my own decisions and say what I feel like is on my mind and still be true to me and my own thoughts and the genesis of my creativity and things like that. I can be more myself in ring. I can mold it into different scenarios so that it works as a protagonist or an antagonist. There's all sorts of ways that I can do that. And I used NXT as a platform to do a lot of that legwork. It's still a work in progress, but a lot of that legwork started. But what I want to do now is reestablish myself as a top star, as a leader, and as a champion. Those are the things that I felt like were missing from my WWE career. I felt like I was never a mainstay at the top of the card. I felt like I was never established as someone who could speak my mind and be genuine and come off as imposing and impressive, just because I didn't get a ton of mic time. I started to at the end of the NXT run, but again, a lot of that is TV and a lot of the script is written for me and things like that. Now I have an opportunity to write my own words and to say what's on my mind and work ad lib and off the cuff and things like that. So to me now, especially with MLW, is my best opportunity to show that I can be at the top of the card, that I can maintain a company in that position, and that I can continue to knock it out of the park, not just in ring, which I've proven a number of times throughout my time in NXT, especially, and certainly the second run in NXT, but also on the microphone and as a character and backstage and vignettes and interacting with the crowd and with a manager and with just everything across the board. That's how I want to rebrand myself. And I hope that people continue to tune into MLW to see that, because it's a very fun process for me, and I feel like I'm in the prime of my career right now, and I'm excited to continue moving forward.
Yeah, awesome, man. I appreciate that, man. Thank you, man. I appreciate you for your time. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna let my bro finish up. I loved your work in NXT. I feel like your matches and everything that you did, your presentation, the person that you brought, it was somebody I didn't know who you were, and then I had to watch you. I had to see, who you were, and like I say, the matches you had with Obafemi, the matches you had with Keith Lee, and just others, you had. You brought it. You brought it all the time, and I definitely wanted to see more of you. And thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that.
And absolutely, like my man said, no matter what anybody else has thought or said in the past, man, we've always loved you. We've always rooted for you, even since the original Black and Gold days. So again, we definitely wanted to make sure.
Donovan Dijakovic.
Yes. So we wanted to make sure, first of the year, we had a couple of interviews lined up, but we wanted to make sure when this dropped, you were the very first one. We were definitely thoroughly confused when you were called up to Raw, and it's like, where the hell is Dijak at? So, but seriously, brother, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for taking time out your day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for tuning in to the GOW. I'm the franchise. He's the king. He's the future world champ. Until next time, we'll see you when we see you. Later.